time once again for the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnick.
Chip, the Ohio State Buckeyes went, they didn't go anywhere. They actually stayed home, but they went out in a little bit of a chilly day, a little mist, little rain in the second half, and took care of Penn State. It was a bit of a sloppy game, a bit of a more of a struggle than it probably should have been, but the bottom line is Ohio State gets a win, gets a four-quarter game from everybody, wins 28-17, and the Chase Young show resumed after a brief hiatus.
I agree with everything you just said, and what's that old expression about be careful what you wish for? Because for all of these games that preceded Penn State, Ohio State fans had become, let's just say, rather comfortable and confident in the idea that, okay, Ohio State has this well in hand. It was actually, as an Ohio State fan, speaking for myself, I'm kind of grateful for the fact that Ohio State was actually challenged and had to play for four quarters. And I agree with you that it was sloppy at times. Chase Young was dominant throughout. But I'm grateful for the effort that Ohio State gave in this game. I'm also very impressed with Penn State. I think they certainly played much better than most Ohio State fans had given them credit for leading up to that game.
Yeah, it was, it's tough coming off 3 straight bye weeks to get up for a game. But the Buckeyes managed to do it eventually. It was kind of funny because Ohio State looked in the beginning of the game like they always look. They went out and scored a touchdown. And, a lot of people said that opening drive for the Buckeyes was a statement drive because they only attempted one pass. It was underthrown, and Chris Olave had to actually break it up and darn near caught the ball coming over the top of the defender. But essentially it was run, and that vaunted Penn State rush defense, yielding only 2.2 yards per carry coming into the game, was shredded. And by the end of that first drive, because it started inside the Ohio State 10, had given up more rushing yards than the season average.
It was very impressive, and I think kind of noteworthy. I know we're going to talk about the game in much greater detail, but noteworthy in the sense that it kind of was a foreshadowing, if you will, of the offensive game plan that Ryan Day had in mind for Ohio State with such a heavy emphasis on running the ball.
It really was. It was absolutely shocking to me to have watched Penn State's last 2 games and to see how that secondary was shredded, and knowing how good their run defense was, and to see Ohio State basically give 0 Fs about that and run the ball 61 times.
Yeah, I'm sure that Coach Day had his mindset that he wanted to make sure that Ohio State could run the ball when they wanted to, but it was kind of perplexing that for an opponent that had been shredded in previous games, that Ohio State did not make more of a concerted effort to attack Penn State via the air.
Yeah, and people will say, well, Ohio State had some trouble in protection, and certainly that is something that needs to be improved upon. But if you look at Justin Fields in this game, Chip, I mean, he completed 73% of his passes, went 16 of 22 with 2 touchdowns, and did not get intercepted. So it's not like Justin Fields struggled. I saw somebody in our message forum say that they thought that Justin Fields got rattled, but I don't think quarterbacks who are rattled go 16 of 22 without throwing a pick.
I agree with you. I think Justin Fields certainly played very well considering the circumstances. As I said a moment ago, we're going to go over the game in much greater detail, but passing as well as running the ball, he was I would not characterize the performance that we saw against Penn State as being rattled.
Yeah, I mean, granted, he underthrew a couple balls. He was late getting the ball out a couple times. Some of that had to do with eluding a pass rusher first before throwing it. So it was obviously, it messed up the timing a little bit. A little bit of it might have been the weather. There was a little bit of wind and, not perfect conditions. Maybe the grip on the ball not quite where it needed to be. But, overall, I thought Justin Fields played a good game in his first, Ohio State-Penn State matchup. I know some people will call this a rivalry game, but This was a game where against a team that, and with the exception of Wisconsin, the team had not been challenged all season. This was a hard-hitting team, a team with equal, or at least close to equal talent. So you weren't playing, Wisconsin's very well-developed and well-disciplined 3-stars. You were playing 5-star athletes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we kind of referenced that last week about the talent on Penn State's roster. Granted, it's not as deep as Ohio State's, but for example, some of the players like KJ Hamler, like Micah Parsons, they had Ohio State scholarship offers. So you're not looking at a team in Penn State that was devoid of talent. And I agree with you. I think hard hitting. They certainly impressed me much more so than I thought. Based on the way that I saw Penn State perform against that team up north when they played them earlier in the season. Mm-hmm. I think they played as well as possible. I never ever felt that the game was ever in doubt, even when Penn State started to make it more interesting. I thought Ohio State was still in command, but Penn State certainly gained my respect after their performance in Ohio Stadium this past Saturday.
Right. It was one of those games where it just felt like Ohio State should have had a much bigger lead than it did. Of course, the first quarter ended 7-0 on that Ohio State early drive, 4-yard run from J.K. Dobbins. The Buckeyes made it 14-0 at halftime with a Dobbins 1-yard run. That was on 4th down, I believe, on a 4th and goal. Am I remembering
I think you're
that
right.
correctly? Yeah. So obviously Rutgers had a goal line stand against the Buckeyes, and Penn State did not. So Rutgers is better than Penn State.
Who can argue with such logic?
It's correlation and causality and all that stuff. I don't know. Transitive properties and such and so forth, as we would hear from Jim Tressel. So 14-0 at the half, but again, should have been more. I mean, there were opportunities missed, at least one in the passing game. There was an opportunity at the goal line where Justin Fields fumbled just as he was going in, maybe inches from the front of the goal line from breaking the plane on he just it was a good low tackle where he got kind of hit the ball and knocked it out of there. Really kind of, I think he hit Justin Fields in the wrist, which tended to bother him the rest of the game, it seemed like. And Ohio State was they go in up 14, but you never felt like Penn State was in the game at halftime.
No, as I said a moment ago, I think Ohio State had command. It was, I would say, frustrating. It would be an adjective that I would use when it came to a lot of the mistakes and miscues that Ohio State had against Penn State. I want to give credit to Penn State for their opportunistic tendencies. I know that was one of the things that you pointed out about in your Grumpy Old Buckeye article, but the fact that Ohio State turned the ball over repeatedly and never was able to come up with it, when causing it, for or against Penn State. But yeah, I think by and large, the fumble by Justin Fields into the end zone, that was one of those very frustrating moments, even though Ohio State still was in pretty solid command throughout the game.
So the Buckeyes got the ball to start the second half. They come out, go right down the field, and make it 21-0. KJ Hill, a nice 24-yard pass from Justin Fields. Perfect ball. You couldn't throw a ball any better than that. It was nice to see KJ have a good game. He has absolutely owned Penn State in his college career. He's owned a lot of teams, but not like he's owned Penn State. He's really had some big games against the Nittany Lions, and it was 21-0. It kind of felt like everything was going Ohio State's way, and then Penn State come up with a little bit of a drive, and partly because I think Ohio State got back on its heels a bit when they knocked Sean Clifford out of the game, and in came Will Levis, and he had they ran a little bit different package with him. He was a little bit more powerful runner, I think, than we saw from Sean Clifford. Sean Clifford is certainly good at running the ball. He's got decent wheels and he can move the ball on the ground. But I think Levis is a little bit tougher guy to bring down.
Yeah, I think Levis is more of that, and I realize this is going to be blasphemy to our audience when I make this comparison, but kind of more Tebow-esque in his style. I'm not saying he's as good as Tim Tebow, so
I'd
don't
go a little Juice Williams, maybe.
Okay, there you go. But I'm not trying to imply that Levis is nearly the equal of those, but
Right.
that kind of that bull in a china shop kind of mentality of, I mean, he was when he would run, he ran with authority and conviction, and it was very difficult for the Ohio State defense, as you mentioned, that this is not what they expected. This isn't what they played for or game plan for. So it was certainly something that I think, as you said, put Ohio State's defense on its heels.
Yeah, and then, cap that drive off with some of the worst tackling we've seen all season as Journey Brown ran for 18 yards to make it 21-7. And everything still seemed fine until the Buckeyes decided they were going to just start giving the ball away for nothing. Started with a Dobbins fumble on... I argued this with a Penn State fan over the weekend, and he said, "Oh, we forced those turnovers. That was you have to give us credit for that." And I look at that Dobbins fumble and I say, "What did he do? I mean, he just kind of smacked at the ball. It wasn't like, you would have had to been holding it improperly to let go of the ball." And I think Dobbins lost concentration on that because. And I mentioned this on Twitter. I mean, Ohio State ran that same run to the left on first down, seemingly every first down. And they stacked it up a number of times, and they stacked it up on this particular time. And he got caught up looking to cut back and find a hole somewhere else and lost concentration, and out came the ball, and that set Penn State up.
I agree with you. I think the play calling certainly tended to be predictable and conservative in the second half, and that was very frustrating. I certainly believe that Coach Day had this in mind, that he wanted to get out of this game knowing that, okay, Ohio State had it in command and no sense in doing anything, truly, I don't want to say, overly risky, but it certainly seemed to me as though, okay, let's bleed some clock here, and we were in command here. But I guess, getting back to the J.K. Dobbins fumble, that I would, if J.K. Dobbins is listening, because of course he would be, that this coming weekend, hey, let's when you're in a big scrum type of a play, let's keep both hands on the ball, not necessarily crucial to fight for every extra yard, because that's when that fumble did take place, despite what that Penn State fan who you were engaging with on Twitter seems to believe, that was more a result of J.K. Dobbins, lack of ball security and going for extra yardage.
Yeah, this is actually was a husband of one of my wife's in-laws, so it was actually not in person. It wasn't actually on Twitter, but yeah. So it was at that point. It's 21-7 after Journey Brown scores. Although he really didn't score, they probably would have scored on the next play. 21-14. Will Levis ran it in. Going back to that first touchdown, I should say that was one that you looked at the replay and it looked like he was short. And anything can happen in a football game, but I kind of thought he was going to get in anyway, so I didn't really have a problem too much with that one. I did have a problem after it was 21-14 on the Levis run, and then on the ensuing drive, they called a fumble and didn't overturn it when it certainly did appear that the ball was still in Justin Fields' hands when his knee was on the ground.
That was very frustrating. That it certainly seemed as though the video evidence showed that Justin Fields' knee was down, as you said, and to not have it called. And that's where you have to just kind of, all right, I realize it's very easy to say, just kind of let it roll off your back, but you still have a game to play. And, and as frustrating as that must have been for all of the fans in Ohio Stadium to not get the call that they felt was justified, the defense had to come out there and shut Penn State down.
Mm-hmm. So the defense came out, another quick sudden change, and this time the defense did its job, held them to a field goal. Jake Pinniger, 42-yard field goal to make it 21-17 at that point, and Penn State won that third quarter by a 17-7 score. And then you go into the fourth quarter, and early in that fourth quarter, Justin Fields said, all right, enough of this. And he hits Chris Olave with a 28-yard pass, and a great catch from Chris Olave, and made it 28-17. And you kind of relaxed a little bit from there because the Buckeye defense took over from that point. They kind of settled in and got used to Will Levis. And knowing they had a 2-score lead and Penn State wasn't going to be able to continue to stay conservative and just run the quarterback and Journey Brown over and over, you kind of felt pretty good. And then Chase Young started to do Chase Young things, and Ohio State just basically saw the game out and managed it in a very trestle ball fashion.
Yeah, I mean, when it came to, as you said, Chase Young started doing Chase Young things. Among those Chase Young things was let's just say the opponents. I guess they wanted to be rather affectionate with Chase Young in terms of holding him every which way to protect. It didn't matter if it was Sean Clifford or Will Levis. In all seriousness, it was very frustrating for Chase Young, I'm sure, to on seemingly every down be held, but he was doing his job. He was still getting to the quarterback, and oh, by the way, because of the extra attention that was being devoted to him by the Penn State offensive line and the running backs trying to protect their quarterbacks, that freed up other players to make big plays as well.
Particularly Baron Browning. For me, Chip, I get it. I understand. Everybody, who among us would not love to give Chase Young a hug?
Yeah, exactly. This time of year,
and that's all Penn State was doing. They were just giving him hugs. There were some great photos from Tom Orr, of basically there was a montage of Chase Young getting held in that game. It is frustrating when you see that and it's not getting called. And Ohio State got moved out of scoring range on the tickiest, tackiest hold you'll ever see, which was already behind the play. J.K. Dobbins was already gone through the hole. And then they nail, I think it was Thayer Munford for a hold, and you look at that and you go, and then seeing some of the stuff was let go on the other side, you're thinking, all right, maybe this is just the officials trying to save lives. They're just afraid Sean Clifford and Will Levis will die if they don't get away with those holds. So, they couldn't live with themselves, Chip, at the end of the day, if Sean Clifford's head was removed from his body by Chase Young. So they just didn't call the hold. They said, well, this is a, it's a survival thing.
I guess it's a very plausible theory. I never thought of it that way, that they're trying to save lives, but let's go with that.
I don't know what else to say about it other than We've lived through this, and I'm sure every team probably thinks that their stud pass rusher gets held a lot, and it's probably true. But we've seen it. Somebody was telling me today, a friend of mine that I used to, he used to be my sports editor actually at the Lantern way back in the day. Said, well, maybe they'll, be able to send in a tape to the league and get that corrected for next week. I said, we've seen this all year with Chase. We saw it with Nick. We saw it with Joey. We saw it with John Simon. This is not getting fixed next week.
No. I would not be holding my breath anytime soon for any kind of immediate relief from Big Ten officiating crews.
No, it's just not going to. There has to be a reason they're allowed to do it. I don't know what that reason is. But again, maybe it's to save lives. Maybe it's like we have to protect these players. And if Chase Young gets a free run every damn down, he's going to kill this guy. That's really the only thing I can think of because I guess it's okay to think that they're that incompetent at their job, but there's guys, Chip, and it's their job to watch for holding. Specifically, that's why they're on the field. There is to watch the line play. And it's not going to be any more evident anywhere on the line than on the edge. And especially when a guy has got a chokehold around Chase Young's neck. It's pretty easy to spot. So I think that their eyes work. I don't think it's incompetence. So it's got to be something else. And what it has to be for me is that they're just out there trying to save lives.
To put it another way, is based on Chase Young's dominant performance, considering the last 2 weeks not participating in Ohio State's wins over Maryland and Rutgers, I will hold out hope that his performance against Penn State, and let's presume that he's going to have as equally of a dominating impact against that team up north on Saturday. We'll get to that later. Mm-hmm. I believe that his performance, Chase Young's performance against Penn State, certainly reinserted him back into the Heisman Trophy mix, even after a two-game absence from the regular season.
Well, there are a lot of people nationally talking about Chase Young, and rightfully so. He's set a new school record for sacks this season, and he did it missing 2 games and basically playing only half of the game in the rest of the games he played.
Yeah, that's dominant.
It's incredible. And even with missing those 2 games, he still has a chance to catch Terrell Suggs for the all-time NCAA single-season sack mark. He needs 6.
Okay. I didn't realize it was that close.
I think he's got 16.5, I believe, and I believe the record's 22.5.
Okay.
I may be wrong on this, but I'm going from memory, which is always dangerous for me. But I think it's 22.5 for a season. He could get 3 against Michigan. He could get 3 in the Big Ten championship game and have it done and dusted before he even get to the postseason.
We'll see.
So, So, anyway, that's why it's okay for teams to hold Chase Young. They're just being safe. It's safety first, folks. We don't want these kids getting hurt.
Nobody does.
So, Chip, the Buckeyes win 28-17. Let us go to our predictions. And you had picked Ohio State 38-24. I had picked Ohio State 39-28. We were both pretty far off. But you had closer to both scores, so you win this round.
Okay, but let's face it. I mean, it's certainly. I mean, we're kind of splitting hairs here. I appreciate the compliment, but I mean, we certainly anticipated higher scoring than what was the final result on Saturday.
I think if they would have thrown the ball as much as they normally do, Ohio State would have easily been able to get to that 38-39 point range, and I think both of us underestimated the defense because even with all those gifts, Penn State only got to 17.
Right. I mean, that's why I said earlier in the podcast that even when Penn State started to make it more interesting, I never ever felt that Ohio State was in danger of losing the game. They were in firm command from pretty much from start to finish.
Right. It was just a matter of two drives in a row doing something dumb and giving the ball away, and you figured at some point they would stop doing that, and they did. But it was a little bit frustrating because 6 balls hit the ground and 6 of them ended up in Penn State hands on the day. The only turnover the other direction was a wonderful interception from Justin Hilliard on a ball that should never have been thrown by a backup quarterback. I don't know if Sean Clifford would have thrown it there. Maybe Sean Clifford would have seen that KJ Hamler was open wide out to the left side. I don't know that would have been a big gain, but it certainly would have been a turnover. So, but it was nice to see. It's always nice to see Justin Hilliard make a play, considering all he's been through in his career.
Yeah, and it's also kind of off the field to know that Justin Hilliard has applied for a 6 year of eligibility, that he'll be possibly on Ohio State's team in 2020 is something that I'm happy to see as well.
And the other big piece of news that came out on Saturday was that Jonathan Cooper will be back. He's going to redshirt.
And that can only help for a defensive line that, let's face it, with Chase Young, this being more than likely, I'm just going to go out on a limb here. I think this is going to be more than likely Chase Young's last year in Columbus. the return of a talented and experienced player like Jonathan Cooper can only help that Ohio State defensive line with regards to leadership, with regards to developing some position stability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like getting a 5-star recruit for one more year. It's like an extra recruiting win. So
Very good
to
point.
See that. All right, so let's take a look at some of the statistics in the game. We will also look at our picks to click and our picks to click on offense. Let's start with offense. You had J.K. Dobbins. Very, very safe to say that J.K. Dobbins clicked in this game as he ran 36 times, which is like 3 games worth for him this year, for 157 yards and 2 touchdowns. Big game for J.K. Dobbins. He was named Big Ten Player of the Week offensively.
And I'm guessing that Coach Day heard our podcast last year about his hatred of J.K. Dobbins not being allowed to go over 100 yards, and maybe decided to kind of reach into okay, I'll let it slide this time, kind of that mindset.
Well, I think it was a master stroke from Master Teague, no pun intended, that he went out and had a couple of bonehead plays in a row to allow J.K. Dobbins to get back on the field because he was in danger of not getting his 100. And then, Master Teague went out, he fell down and lost yards on one run, and then he had a false start on the next play. And then he came out of the game and J.K. went back in.
And let's hope that was a learning experience for Master Teague, because in this coming game up in Ann Arbor, they need Master Teague to be playing at his very best. Can't afford boneheaded plays against the Wolverines.
Exactly. Well, he did come back in with one more rush for 7 yards, so he did good on his on his next attempt. I had Chris Olave, and for a long time, Chris Olave was a bad pick to click. But Chris Olave had 2 catches for 44 yards and a touchdown, and a massive pass breakup that could have been an interception on the first drive. So I'm going to say he clicked in this game.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree.
All right, so just to go through some more stats, Justin Fields ran 21 times. That's more times than I'd like to see him run, for 68 yards. He actually gained 103, but he lost 35 in sack yards and other run plays that were stopped behind the line. Without the negative plays, he would have had a 100-yard gain. Journey Brown went 11 carries, 65 yards, and a touchdown. Will Levis, 18 carries, 61 yards, and a touchdown. Noah Cain did play in this game, but he only had 1 carry for 1 yard. So not a factor. Sean Clifford, 6 carries and no net yards. He had 12 yards gained and 12 yards lost. Justin Fields, as we mentioned, 16 of 22, no interceptions, 188 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was sacked 3 times. One of those times he sacked himself and almost got himself hurt late in the game. Sean Clifford, 10 of 17 for 71 yards, a long of 18. And Will Levis, 6 of 11 with an interception, 57 yards, a long of 22. The receiving core, KJ Hill was the big man for Ohio State, 4 catches, 46 yards, 1 touchdown. So he had the most catches, the most yards, and a touchdown. Olave, 2 for 44 and a touchdown. Then a bunch of guys with 2, Austin Mack, Garrett Wilson, Benjamin Victor, Jeremy Ruckert, all each had 2 catches. Not a lot of yards through the air in this game. We thought Penn State would have some success with Pat Freiermuth, and he had 6 catches for 40 yards. His long was 11. He didn't really tear up the Ohio State defense the way, in previous years you might have seen a talented tight end like him do it. And I think we have to give tons and tons of credit here to Pete Werner, who was on him like glue, broke some of those up, and even ones that were caught, Werner had very good coverage on a lot of those. It was just a good player making a play. He ended up with 8 solo tackles, 2 assists for 10 total tackles, and 2 pass breakups. Pete Werner had a day.
Oh, yeah. I think I agree with something that on another podcast, Tony Gerdeman and Tom Orr said, for all of the people that had bad and negative things to say about Pete Werner, you certainly owe Pete Werner an apology, and or possibly you should be maybe following a different sport or a different activity, I think, in Gerd's mind, because quite frankly, yeah, Pete Werner played exceptionally well against Freiermuth. He, as you said, he was not nearly the factor that I certainly dreaded going into that game. And just to circle back to something you said a few moments ago that I completely agree with about Justin Fields, and that is carrying the ball far, far too much to your liking as well as mine. Earlier in the season, we talked about the importance of Justin Fields staying healthy because of everything that this team was hoping to accomplish, and with it so close and within their grasp, to possibly risk Justin Fields to injury by excessively having him carry the ball. I'm not saying that he can't carry the ball ever, but I think I agree with you. I think that 21 carries was far too many.
Yeah, I think you want, in a big game where you're going to use his legs, I think you don't want. I think you want to be more closer to that 15 carry range than 21. I think you want to be closer to 15, and that's going to include some scrambles when he has to tuck it and run.
Certainly, and I do like the fact that he does slide. He does not let he'll try to gain as many yards as possible, but he has mastered the slide, something that Dwayne Haskins never seemed to be able to do last season. Not taking shots at Dwayne Haskins, but I would prefer that Justin Fields, hopefully this weekend up in Ann Arbor, that he is a little bit more judicious, let's say, in the number of carries. I'm going to be anxious to see what the game plan will. How many carries, as you said, will involve Justin Fields carrying the ball.
Yeah, Sean Wade did also get some coverage on Freiermuth, but I thought Pete Werner did a good job. And there's a blogger that I actually respect that was questioning Pete Werner's performance in this game while the game was going on Twitter, and I said, I don't know what this guy is looking at, because to me, Pete Werner's doing a fantastic job. He's right in Freiermuth's grill for the entirety of his route. I mean, he was doing a great job, I thought, and I think the Ohio State coaching staff named him co-defensive player of the game with Chase Young, who had a kind of a good game.
Oh yeah, Chase Young certainly had a good game, and as I said a few moments ago, Pete Werner, if you are still operating under the belief that Pete Werner is a hindrance to this team, take Gerd's advice. Maybe you need to follow another sport.
So Freiermuth again, 6 for 40, no touchdowns. KJ Hamler only 3 catches for 45 yards, no touchdowns. And Justin Shorter had 3 for 28, no touchdowns. Journey Brown 2 catches for -3 yards. So not a lot going on in that Penn State passing game. Only 128 total yards passing for the Nittany Lions. No touchdowns through the air. That's a pretty good day for the pass defense. Let's talk a little bit about the defense now. Our defensive picks to click. You had Jordan Fuller. Now, Jordan Fuller in this game, he was pretty solid. He was pretty solid. He ended up with 2 tackles solo, 1 assist for 3 total tackles, but he was part of that pass coverage that was kind of shutting down. He almost had an interception, but he collided with a much, much larger Freiermuth in the air, and it knocked the ball free. So he could have had a pick in this game.
Yeah, if he had come down with the interception, I might have been inclined to say that he clicked. But I will say that, I mean, it was a good game. I'm not unhappy with it, but he certainly did not have nearly the impact that I anticipated he would.
Now, I had this guy named Chase Young, which is it's kind of like having the free it's kind of like having the free space in a bingo game. But
yes,
he did some things. He had 9 tackles, 5 of them were solo. He had 3 sacks for a total of 22 yards. He had 4 tackles for loss, and he forced a fumble that nobody bothered picking up on the Ohio State defense. In fact, that's why they didn't pick it up, is because they tried to pick it up rather than just falling on it. They tried to scoop and score, and Penn State ended up getting it back. But Chase kind of had a pretty good day, I would say. He was Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week and co-Defensive Player of the Week for Ohio State, and again got himself back into the Heisman conversation. And I know that he's got two very big fans in the press box at every game that Fox does in Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've heard the expression "always leave them wanting more." Mm-hmm. And when it came to Chase Young, his performance against Penn State in what was Ohio State's final home game of the 2019 season, he definitely left Ohio State fans that were in attendance wanting more. He played exceptionally well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just if you thought there was going to be any rust, no rust. But I know when you and I did our picks to click and I gave you first choice on defense and you went with Jordan Fuller, I said, yeah, I got to take Chase. I mean, he's coming back after the suspension. He's going to be very, very hungry, and that didn't bode well for Penn State. And I think we talked about Penn State's holding, and they did hold a lot. But I also thought that Penn State's offensive line was better in this game than I expected them to be.
I agree, especially the starting center for Penn State. I think it was the day before it was announced that he would be that he would not be playing. So they certainly played much better than I anticipated.
Yeah. So anything else we haven't covered yet from this game, Chip?
Not from this game. If anything, my compliments again to Penn State for playing Ohio State far more competitively than I think most Ohio State fans had given them credit. I remember thinking last week as the game approached that the line that the odds makers had, I thought that was far too generous for Ohio State. I'm not sure yet, but I do know that next year Ohio State, when they play at Penn State, it's on October 24th. And what I mean about not knowing yet is Ohio State fans have come grudgingly to accept the fact that is usually the whiteout game, and let's hope that the powers that be at Fox for your big noon, or as you refer to it, your big nude Saturday,
big nude Saturday.
That Ohio State will get they'll get the benefit of a noon kickoff in Happy Valley next October 24th when they go and play Penn State again. I wish the Nittany Lions nothing but the best of luck for the remainder of this year and whatever bowl game they wind up in.
Yeah, it was. I think the only other thing we really need to cover from this game is how the two coaches approached this game, and that is that when the chips were on the table and it was time to flip over those cards and show your hand, James Franklin folded, and Ryan Day, laid him down, because when it came time to be, when there was an opportunity to either be aggressive or play defensive, and we talked about the conservatism of the play calling, and we didn't really get too deep into it, but we did talk about all the running plays and the lack of passing against a pass defense that had been lit on fire by Indiana and Minnesota, those high-powered passing offenses. James Franklin flinched, and he punted from plus territory multiple times on 4th and medium to short. And Ryan Day said, "Nope, not going to do that. I like my defense, and I think that my defense would be just as good at stopping a 60-yard drive as a 90-yard drive. So I'm going to go for it."
Yeah, I do believe that James Franklin deserves some of the critique and criticism that he's receiving for his overly conservative mindset against Ohio State. You would have kind of figured, as you said, being in plus territory, that's when you're going to want to go for it. But I think if anything, James Franklin in previous games, not even involving Ohio State, he's kind of shown those overly conservative tendencies, and I know that that's one of the things that frustrates a lot of Penn State fans when he does these kind of things.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you can look at this two ways. You can say, in years past, it's one thing to say, I think you can't drive 85, 90 yards on my defense. But if you really have that much trust in your defense and that much respect for your defense, why not? 65 yards is a long way too. So, you may as well make that effort, because I honestly believe, Chip, that when you show confidence in your offense and you show confidence in your team and that belief that you're going to pick up the first down and that even if you don't, it's going to be okay, I think that translates to the players.
I agree with you. I think that's the kind of thing that confidence is contagious, and by the same token, lack of confidence is contagious. So I think you're onto something there.
All right, so you touched on this a little bit. You think that Chase Young will be in New York City for the Heisman ceremony, at least. He may not win it because defensive players, anybody that's not a quarterback is not allowed to win it, seemingly. But you think that the suspension won't keep him out of New York?
I do. I think that the discerning eyes of the voters, they can see as well as you and I and anyone else who has watched college football can recognize the fact that Chase Young is the best player in college football this year. And it's unfortunate that the Heisman Trophy voters throughout their history have excluded defensive players. And let's face it, Orlando Pace back in 1996 was certainly the best player in college football, was worthy of the Heisman Trophy. Getting back to the present day, when we talk about Chase Young, even with the 2 games missed, I think that his dominant performances that have been on big noon Saturdays throughout the college football season, I think, are going to warrant a trip to New York City. Whether he wins it or not, I can't put odds on that. I think it's probably Joe Burrow's trophy to lose, but I think it wouldn't be surprising if Chase Young finished second or third.
Mm-hmm. And you referenced another podcast earlier in this podcast, which is certainly one way you could go. I'm going to go ahead and say that they're called the Buckeye Weekly. They are also on our Ozone radio network of shows. They talked about, I think both Tony and Tom said that for them, Chase Young's the second best player they've ever seen for Ohio State. They're still putting Orlando Pace first. Tony, I believe, said that he is the top defensive player for Ohio State he's ever seen, passing Antoine Winfield in his eyes. Where is Chase for you right now, with still knowing that there's still some really big games to go this year?
Oh, wow. Very good question. I should have seen that one coming, too. I definitely say Orlando Pace still is the best player regardless. And of my affection for Chris Spielman. I think we both share that affection for Chris Spielman in terms of being one of the all-time greats at Ohio State. I'm gonna hold off and to see how Chase Young performs this weekend, as well as in. Can I get a mulligan until the end of the season? Because I want to, I know it's chickening out, but in all fairness, it's the kind of thing where he's been so dominant all year. I want to see if he can continue this torrid pace through the remainder of whatever Ohio State season is.
Yeah, he's certainly a dominant player. He's a player that he plays a position where you can affect the run game and the pass game, and he often does. I struggle with where I put him in my all-time pantheon. I think, for me, I might be biased because I went to the games in person more than, and I saw Chris Spielman perform in person and saw some of the things he did, and he wasn't blessed with the physique that a Chase Young has. Certainly, he was a big dude and he could run a bit and all those things, but physically, he wasn't the specimen that Chase Young is. So I kind of have a hard time with that comparison. But for me, I don't know that anybody's passed Chris Spielman. And I thought that Orlando Pace was a wonderful, wonderful player. But again, my bias probably has me having Chris Spielman as the best Buckeye I've ever seen play. And knowing that I'm limited because I didn't get to go to the stadium to see, Archie and those guys play back in the day. I did get to see them on TV sometimes, but again, back in those days, not all the games were televised, and some of the ones that were on after the news on a tape delay, which my parents wouldn't let me stay up and watch. So, I'm sure I'm missing outstanding performances and maybe some of the games that would have changed my mind. But Chase Young certainly since 1990 probably. Since 1990, 1995, certainly the best Ohio State Buckeye in that time frame for sure for me.
Okay, so he does exceed Antoine Winfield in your eyes.
Oh yeah, I think so, and I love Antoine Winfield, and I think Antoine Winfield was a rare kind of lockdown coverage guy who could also make a huge difference in the run game, and I just think that Antoine did a great job of taking half the field away from the opposing team. Chase Young by himself takes away the whole field because he doesn't give you time to do what you want to do. And if you dedicate the resources to making sure he doesn't disrupt your team, then other guys take away what you want to do. So you're kind of picking your poison. If you have to dedicate 2 to 3 players to keeping Chase Young out of your backfield. And if you do that, someone else is going to come in and get you. Whether it be a Baron Browning or a Jayshon Cornell or a Devon Hamilton. Somebody else is going to get you because of the attention you had to spend on him. So I think Chase Young can take away the entire field, and I think Antoine Winfield took away half the field. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes complete sense. I was going to just to kind of close the loop, since we both have a mutual respect for Chris Spielman for the way he played at Ohio State. Mm-hmm. I recall an interview years ago. I can't remember how many years ago, but it was years ago that I heard Chris Spielman say, in his estimation, that Antoine Winfield was the best defensive player that he had ever seen at Ohio State. And I thought that was lofty praise, considering how Chris Spielman, how he played at Ohio State.
Yeah, and I would expect that from Chris. I would expect that Chris would never say. He's not the kind of guy who would say, "I'm the best player that I ever saw at Ohio State." You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I wouldn't anticipate him being into self promotion. I just thought, considering Chris Spielman, a number of the players that he was on teams, the fact that in his even as an analyst, having the opportunity to see Ohio State players. Such as like AJ Hawk or like Mike Vrabel, or we could keep going on and on. Right, and I realize it gets very, very difficult. So I just thought it was very, very telling that Chris Spielman said Antoine Winfield he thought was the best defender he had ever seen in an Ohio State uniform. And I'm with you. I think I'm going to hold on to my self-requested mulligan until the end of the season before I answer your very fair question. But yeah, it's going to certainly be one of those things that it's a poser, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I will say this: one thing that Chase Young does that Chris Spielman did is that when you need a play, he makes it. Like when the game's on the line, and this could be it. This is either Penn State gets back in the game or Ohio State puts it away. Chase Young makes the play. Spielman was that way. He was always raising his game at the precise moment you needed him to raise his game. I go back to it was 1985, I believe, when Iowa was ranked first in the country and Ohio State was ranked third, and the Hawkeyes came into Ohio Stadium, and there was a very key 4th and 1 play, and Spielman met Ronnie Harmon, who tried to do the thing where you hand it off and he takes off and just jumps over the pile for 1 yard. And Spielman met him in the air and knocked him backwards. And those are the kinds of plays that he made. And Chase Young makes those kind of plays too.
Oh, yeah, and I do recall that game that you're referencing because I was in high school at the time, but I remember it was played in a driving rainstorm, and Chris Spielman certainly rose to the occasion that day.
Mm-hmm. And he routinely would have a 10, 11 tackle day and that kind of thing. Had a pick 6 in the Cotton Bowl against Texas A&M. I mean, just an amazing career. And Chase Young's had that kind of career as well. And it's just, I mean, it's good for Chase, but it's a shame for us as fans. that we don't get that fourth year of watching him because, everybody goes to the NFL early nowadays, whereas they didn't used to be able to do that. So, but, we will see what Chase can do for the remainder. We've got the game and then we've got the postseason, whatever that holds in store, whether that's, 2 games, 3 games, or whatever. We'll see what Chase does to probably most likely close out his career. He kind of talked about that after the game, about it being his last game in the shoe, and everybody's like, "What? You're only a junior," kind of facetiously on Twitter. But he's got a year of eligibility left. I think he needs a phone call from Chris Carter, but I don't think it's coming.
I doubt it. I wouldn't hold your breath on that.
All right, we talked about Jonathan Cooper to redshirt. Another thing that this Saturday did for the Buckeyes is it got their long-awaited, was it 2021 running back or 2020 running back?
2020.
2020. So is it Mian or Mayan Williams?
I've heard it pronounced as Mayan Williams.
I know that Tony pronounces it that way, but he's not sure he's right. So, but he is a flip from Iowa State, and we've heard good things about Mayan Williams. Ever since that flip happened, we've heard people come out of the woodwork saying, I've covered some of his games, and he's legit. He's going to help Ohio State.
Yeah, some of the highlights that I have seen of Mayan Williams playing for Cincinnati Winton Woods, I think he's listed at 5'11", but most people are saying that's probably closer to 5'9.5". But more of, to put it in context, kind of in the style of a physical runner in the style of Carlos Hyde, and he does not have breakaway speed, but the clips that have been shown of him when he does get in the open field, that he's certainly capable of taking the ball the distance. So it's great to see that Ohio State was able to get an Ohio running back that was certainly worthy of an Ohio State scholarship offer to rescind his commitment to Iowa State and stay in his home state and play for the Buckeyes.
Just out here flipping them recruits. So that's good. That's good to hear. It's funny because you play Maryland and you get players to decommit, and then you play Penn State and you get players to commit, to flip their commit.
Well, I know that we're coming up on the end of November, but we're about, I don't have the precise dates, in mind, but let's just say that, I think it's about 4 weeks from early signing day. So, the 2020 class is pretty much finished up. It's just I'm glad to see that Mayan Williams is going to be a part of it.
Yeah. All right. Before we get to our Big Ten roundup, the other big news, Chip, was that Greg Schiano apparently out of the running for the Rutgers head coaching position, the former defensive coordinator at Ohio State, and he's a guy who, of course, has had success at Rutgers previously, where so many have failed miserably, and he's bounced around a little bit in recent years, and never quite got to the level of success he had for that short run he had at Rutgers, where he turned that program around. There's been a lot of talk about this, about that his demands were too great, and he was demanding multi-million-dollar facilities be built and this and that, and Rutgers said, okay, we're gonna look elsewhere, and weren't giving into his demands. We've also heard people on social media, and I take this with a grain of salt, but when they got a blue check mark by their name, you can kind of get a sense of who some people are, and one of those folks talked about the fact that Schiano had gone in, or at least allegedly had gone in and presented his scouting report on the Rutgers, the entire Rutgers team, every player, and also talked about the players that he had identified in the transfer portal that could maybe potentially help in the short term. And he was supposedly already starting to recruit behind the scenes. And I don't know how much of any of that is true, but where does Rutgers go without Greg Schiano? Where does that school turn to when it is not a destination that anybody wants to go to? I mean, we've now heard some rumblings that they might offer the job to Jeff Hafley, but I think the Chris Ash experience shows that that's not the move you want to make.
I completely agree with you. I'm not sure what direction they go. I've heard other names like Butch Jones. I've heard Joe Moorhead, who's the current head coach down at Mississippi State. That obviously Jeff Hafley, but I don't think Jeff Hafley will take that. As you correctly noted, the Chris Ash experiment did not go well, and I think Jeff Hafley can sit tight and get another high-profile job that the chances of success are much better. Now you referenced something else about, I'm not sure how much of this is true and how much of this is not true. One of the articles that I did read online that is true is that a number of very prominent Rutgers boosters and contributors are completely fed up and are laying this squarely and solely at the feet of Patrick Hobbs, who is the Rutgers athletic director, and they are so angry that they are going to cease donations to Rutgers athletic department, which is just making a bad situation worse. I'm not sure what direction Rutgers goes. I'm not here to judge Greg Schiano in terms of what his demands as I don't want to label them as being excessive, since, as you said, we really don't know what is true and what is not. I do know that it is an uphill battle for anyone, regardless of whether we're talking Greg Schiano, Jeff Hafley, anyone else that takes that job. So perhaps the Rutgers administration knows something that you and I and the rest of the college football world does not. But if they have a mystery candidate, now would be as good a time as any to unveil that candidate to try and calm the waters and make some peace in New Jersey.
It is a mess that this school is in the Big Ten. It is a mess that this is a Big Ten member institution and is going through this. They're not a destination, a destination job. I think that in some ways they're handcuffed. But here's my take on the Greg Schiano thing: is even if all of the demands that are rumored to have been made, even if Rutgers gave in and said, okay, we'll give you that, now come and coach us, and even if Schiano didn't do anything as their coach, you're looking at a school that would then have improved and greatly upgraded its facilities, which is a recruiting tool, and had shown a willingness to pay assistant coaches, which is also very, very vital. And I think those are not necessarily unreasonable demands. If you're going to take the Rutgers job, you want to have a fighting chance at some success. And some of that comes in the form of facilities, and some of that comes in the form of being able to pay your assistant coaches. And if Rutgers is saying, look, we're looking for a coach, we're not looking to upgrade facilities, we're not looking to pay assistants, but we're looking for the best coach out there, it's not going to happen.
No, it's not. And I mean, as you said, it's a disaster within the Big Ten, having Rutgers, just basically taking up space. I mean, for lack of a better word. I mean, they're, everyone can. I don't care if we're talking within the Big Ten East division, if you're talking for those Big Ten West teams that when they have crossover games against Rutgers, you look at that and like, okay, there's an automatic W. It's embarrassing. This is going to be one of the tweets that I did retweet over the weekend is, okay, why not Jim Delaney should coach this team, because this was his bright idea to bring this team into the Big Ten. You asked a very valid question that I don't have the answer. I don't think anyone does. Where do they go? What does Rutgers do? Stay tuned, because it's certainly not going to be fixed in 2020. I mean, this is going to be a very, very long uphill slog.
I mean, you almost have to get gimmicky and go for a triple option type of offense or something different that is going to present a unique challenge or a unique problem because they just can't stand toe to toe in recruiting. They can't draw a big name coach to go there. It's a mess, and it's not getting any better with the way that they're reacting. Like, well, you're going to come in here and demand that we upgrade our training facilities, and that just shows you that okay, yeah, you don't want to be pushed around by your candidate, but at the same time, you're sending a message that no, we don't care enough about our program to upgrade those facilities. And
I
that's
think
not,
you're
that's
onto
not
something.
it's
Right. I think you're onto something with about the short sightedness about not even doing this for the improvement in the facilities. One of the things that I wanted to interject, I think you make a really good point, and I know that Tom Orr on the Buckeye Weekly, or at least in his tweets, had said, "Oh, like they should go after Ken Niumatalolo." I always butcher the last name of Navy and Navy's head coach. You know, the idea of a triple option offense to try and do something different. I'm not saying that's a bad strategy, but let's face it, Rutgers for years has been bleeding recruits from New Jersey into the rest of the Big Ten and around the country. Mm-hmm. And the only reason I bring that up is that, okay, if you are going to go with a gimmick offense to try to do something creative and something to kind of spark some wins, how many hotshot recruits from the state of New Jersey are going to want to play in a triple option offense? I mean, it's kind of a very difficult thing. So I'm not sure, as you know, we keep coming back to it, you know, where does Rutgers go from here? Who are the future candidates? We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. It may not work in a major conference. I know, Georgia Tech had very limited success with it. But, it's I'm just throwing ideas at the wall at this point for Rutgers because if I'm in charge of Rutgers, here's what I'm doing. I'm going to say, look, we may not have the winningest program. We may not be able to attract the big name coaches. We may be losing recruits. But here's what we can do. We can put the money together and build the best facilities in the country. And that's going to move the needle a little bit. And once you move the needle a little bit and you have a little bit of success, that can build on itself. Rutgers under Schiano the first time was not, world beaters, but they were competitive every week. And they were not the pushovers and the joke that they have become since, and that maybe they were before, and that may be the Rutgers ceiling, really.
Right. I mean, prior to the Greg Schiano news, I heard someone, I can't recall, it wasn't anyone, like for example, like it wasn't Gerd or Tom or you or I, but somebody said, if you're Rutgers, you have to schedule 3 cupcakes for your non-conference opponents and win those. And then you have to hope that you're able to steal a game against either Indiana, against Maryland, because you're not going to beat, the power teams in the Big Ten East, to get up to 4, and then possibly steal 2 games from whatever your crossover games are within the Big Ten West. That was kind of the realistic approach, and that was prior to the Greg Schiano news of that he would not be the head coach. I mean, so it's not going to be easy in any way whatsoever.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and it's a big mess, and it's a big mess that Jim Delaney made because those households and that New York market that's not really New York. it just looks like a big mistake in retrospect, and I mean nobody liked the move at the time, and it looks even worse now. So it's a bit of a black eye for the conference, and I'm not sure how you. I mean, maybe one other thing you could try is what Arizona State did, and go out and get yourself, a guy who's been, in the NFL, who's maybe been out of it for a few years, and maybe sell him on the, CEO as head coach, model, and throw money at him and his assistants, and let him go hire other NFL guys that maybe have a little bit of appeal to some of these recruits who maybe watched them coaching games when they were, in high school. So it's another way that maybe they could approach the problem.
Like I said, I think we could just keep going round and round on this, and we're never going to get an answer. I don't know where you begin.
All right, so let's go around the Big Ten. Chip, Rutgers lost 27-0 to the mighty Michigan State offense, the juggernaut that is the Spartan offense. Lewerke threw for 239. Elijah Collins ran for 109, and Cody White received for 136 and 3 touchdowns. And so good job, Rutgers.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's certainly, like I'm happy for Michigan State to get back on the winning side. They're going to need another win in order just to gain bowl eligibility. They play Maryland this coming week.
We talked about Jeff Hafley, and I'm not wanting this to happen, but if he puts together another year next year with the Ohio State defense like he did this year, it wouldn't be a shock to see him get offered a head coaching position at a place like Michigan State.
Oh, I could definitely see Michigan State in his future. I'm hoping that Mark D'Antonio, I know he has proclaimed that he is coming back, but hopefully they come up with a good succession plan, because the end is much closer for Mark D'Antonio than I think he wants to acknowledge.
Michigan State is not yet bowl eligible, Chip. Who do the Spartans play next week or this Saturday?
They play Maryland. That's a 3:30 kickoff. Maryland's at Michigan State, so Michigan State, they win that game. That makes them 6-6, and that means the Motor City Bowl or whatever it's called in Detroit, the day after Christmas, probably.
All right, congratulations to the Spartans for being bowl eligible, because if Rutgers isn't the worst team in the Big Ten, Maryland may have surpassed them. The Terrapins losing 54-7 this week at home to Nebraska, and it was never close. It was 34-0 at halftime. Maryland scored a late garbage touchdown in the fourth quarter to not get shut out, but Nebraska steamrolled them in sort of the fashion we kind of expected Nebraska to maybe steamroll some other teams this year, but they were unable to. So the 5-6 now Nebraska Cornhuskers, also not yet bowl eligible, crushing Maryland, and Maryland has just been awful the last 6 or 7 weeks. I mean, they've been bad since week 3, but not like they've been the last 6 weeks.
No, I think Maryland, I mean, they signed off a few weeks ago. They're getting ready for 2020, and it was nice to see Nebraska have a dominant performance, kind of what a lot of fans such as myself had anticipated for 2019. Speaking of Nebraska, that is the Friday afternoon, enjoying your turkey, enjoying your leftovers, a Friday afternoon game. It's a 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time kickoff on Big Ten Network. It's Iowa at Nebraska, and as you said, Nebraska is not yet bowl eligible, so they need to steal that win against the 17th ranked Iowa Hawkeyes in order to gain bowl eligibility for themselves.
Ah, yes, Farmageddon. It's Farmageddon. it's the battle to see which state has the best corn. It's Ohio. Spoiler alert. So the Nebraska Cornhuskers will be trying to beat an Iowa team coming off a big 19-10 victory over the Illinois Fighting Illini, who just this week, Chip, were eliminated from a Big Ten championship game contention.
Yeah, from what I understand, obviously not watching the game, but I understand that there was a hard hit taken in that game, the Iowa-Illinois game, where I think Brandon Peters might have suffered targeting, but it wasn't called, and Lovie Smith was kind of like, if that's not targeting, what is? The long-standing national nightmare of how to act actively or accurately, I should say, call targeting penalties. That was something that marred that game. But yeah, Illinois, they're playing Northwestern in their rivalry game. It's actually like the home finale for the Fighting Illini. I think Illinois will get back on the winning side of things this coming weekend. So it's good to see that Illinois, like I said, that they got themselves back into bowl game contention. I couldn't begin to venture a guess as to which bowl game they're going to wind up in.
So Illinois right now needs a win against Northwestern to get to 7 wins, which would improve their bowl destination, I would think. The Illini and Northwestern play for. Is it Lincoln's Hat that they play for?
Now that's a good question. I didn't even know there was such a thing.
I think
that sounds like
it's a
something that
trophy
should
game. I'm almost positive it's a trophy game, and I am not well versed enough with that rivalry to know what the trophy game is. But I think it has something to do with Lincoln.
That makes sense.
And it should.
I just never heard. I had never heard of that.
Yeah. So if only there were some way for us to find out and discover this. I apologize to anyone out there who may hear some wailing. I have a blind cat, and she has just woke up, so she may get a little rambunctious. But yeah, so the Illinois and Northwestern rivalry will be renewed this weekend, and should be fun. That should be actually a fun game.
We'll see. I mean, Northwestern, I think to kind of put them in the same category as Nebraska. I mean, a very disappointing season. They were eliminated from bowl contention a long time ago. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, I think all eyes are going to be focused on the game up in Ann Arbor, rightfully so. I'll be kind of curious to see what kind of viewership Northwestern and Illinois garners.
Okay, so the two teams, Northwestern and Illinois, play for the Land of Lincoln Trophy, Chip.
Okay, it's not their hat then.
It is a bronze replica of a stovepipe hat famously worn by Abraham Lincoln. Yeah. So there you go.
Okay, it's too bad it's not the actual hat. I mean, that would be something.
That would be really, really awesome, and a really man, that would be a great thing. Like if every player got to take the hat home for a day, that kind of thing. You imagine that, some kid walking around wearing Abraham Lincoln's actual hat.
Yeah, I could see it. That would be, that would make either of those schools a destination school. Hey, you come here, you can possibly wear Abraham Lincoln's hat.
Yeah. So Iowa wrecks Illinois' slim hopes to get to represent the Big Ten West in the championship game, the league championship game. The Northwestern Wildcats that they will play this week, they played Minnesota, and a surprisingly, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a really competitive game. Kind of Minnesota took control early, but I would not have thought Northwestern would have stayed within 16 points of Minnesota, but they did. It was 38-22.
Yeah, Minnesota, it was good to see them get back to their winning ways, considering they've got their big finale against Wisconsin this coming weekend.
Mm-hmm. So let's move on to Wisconsin and Purdue. Purdue gets kind of tricky with a nice little trick play. They actually led this game in the second quarter, but the Wisconsin Badgers end up winning by 3 touchdowns, 45-24. Jonathan Taylor, another huge day, 222 yards, but only 1 touchdown. And I read a ridiculous stat that Jonathan Taylor's 5,000 plus yards rushing in his career, more than 1,000 of them of those yards have come against 2 opponents, one of which is Purdue.
Well, that's amazing. I was going to say about Wisconsin as a team, they were able to rack up over 400 yards rushing on the ground against Purdue. So I have a feeling when Indiana and Purdue play for the old Oaken Bucket, now there's a little, there's a trophy that I'm a little bit more familiar with. I wasn't, the Land of Lincoln trophy. But getting back to, I think, you can kind of get an idea as to what Indiana's mode of attack will be this coming weekend against Purdue.
Yeah, it was surprising that if Jonathan Taylor indeed has gotten. Okay, so here is what this is the stat that was put out by Dustin Shute, managing editor at Saturday Tradition, covering Big Ten football. He says of 5,856 career yards for Jonathan Taylor, 1,436 have come against Nebraska and Purdue. Almost a quarter of his career yards have come in 6 games against those 2 teams.
I would never have guessed that until you told me that.
Chip, does that make Jonathan Taylor a clown fraud?
No, no, that's pretty harsh. I just think, yeah, he's basically he's taking advantage of what's presented in front of him. That's all.
So he's not been very good against Ohio State, but he has only played him a couple of times.
He might be playing him again in a couple weeks.
All right, so we won't call him a clown fraud and make him mad, just in case that's the matchup in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
so
just
Wisconsin is now 9-2. They get a chance to get to double-digit wins this year. Purdue drops to 4-7. They ain't going bowling in West Lafayette. Then here's a game that started out like a house on fire and ended up in a dumpster fire. Michigan 39, Indiana 14. Both the teams scored on their first 2 drives, and then Indiana completely stopped playing defense, and half their team got hurt. They were already playing without Whop Philyor. Stevie Scott missed some time. He did come back in the game, but also they lost another receiver in that game as well, who I had his name in my head a few minutes ago, and I've forgotten it. But it was... there was just not... Oh, Ty Freifogel got injured in that game. They were already without Whop Philyor. Again, Stevie Scott missed some time in that game, and Indiana just fell apart. And I will say, Michigan they are peaking at the right time of year, Chip.
They are, and we'll talk about them in other due time. I just want to acknowledge my ill-founded prediction that Indiana would win because, as you said, it started out. It certainly seemed as though Indiana had what it would take to go toe-to-toe. And in fairness, after the Ohio State Penn State game, we had my father-in-law and my sister-in-law over for a family dinner, just to kind of, like we already watched the Ohio State Penn State game and, it's time to sit down. So I didn't watch after the 14-14. And then when I saw that it wound up being such a rout by the Wolverines, as I know on Twitter, you said, it seems as though like the strategy for the Wolverines is to hurt every one of the Hoosiers. I know that, or something along those lines, paraphrasing it. I know that, when it came to Indiana, Peyton Ramsey, I know that he took some hard shots. Hopefully he's going to be okay to play this coming weekend against Purdue. But I would like to circle back to what you said a moment ago, and that is, yes, I do believe that the Wolverines are peaking at the right time. I certainly believe that they're playing as, their best football. When you compare and contrast what college football fans saw from the Wolverines earlier in the year, it's certainly a substantial improvement in every respect.
Yeah. So it was a tough game. I think what I said about that was that the Wolverines' strategy of injuring every Indiana Hoosier would possibly bear fruit, and it apparently did.
Yeah, I mean, I think Indiana has nothing to be ashamed of, considering they're going to a bowl game no matter what happens against Purdue. And Tom Allen, I think, has that program headed in the right direction. That's not to imply that Kevin Wilson headed in the wrong direction, but I think Tom Allen is probably, he's probably getting about as much as he possibly can out of that roster as it's presently constructed. I think Indiana will always be one of those teams that, 7-8 wins is probably their ceiling, to be fair. And, Tom Allen has done a tremendous job with what he's done this year with the Hoosiers.
Well, I can guarantee you Tom Allen will get more Big Ten Coach of the Year award votes than Ryan Day.
I think that's a fair guarantee. Absolutely.
Lots of Buckeyes, Chip, before we get to this week's preview. A lot of Buckeyes are up for end-of-the-year awards. Obviously Chase Young, Justin Fields, guys like that are up for these big awards. One of the awards that's not as well known is the Patrick Minnelli Long Snapper Award, and Liam McCullough is a finalist for that.
And I'm kind of curious if Patrick Minnelli was as much of a master of the T-shirt as Liam McCullough has demonstrated in his time in Columbus. Because for all of Liam McCullough's extraordinary contributions on the football field, that's going to be one of the things that Ohio State fans will certainly miss next summer during move-in day. The Liam McCullough T-shirt extravaganza that the beat reporters have been treated to over the last several years. Liam McCullough certainly has been a treat.
Well, hopefully he'll pass that tradition on to his brother, and we'll get to
Certainly
continue that. All right, so that's our trip around the Big Ten, Chip, and of course, this week we will have the game, the greatest rivalry in all of sports. But before we do that, let's answer our listener mail. We do have some this week.
That's great to yeah.
It's great. Here's how you do it. If you want to ask us a question, we'll answer it on the air, obviously. All you got to do is hit us up on Twitter. I am at Mike36Fan on Twitter, and Chip is at Chip Minnick. That's the last name is spelled Minnich. And hit us up on Twitter with the hashtag SBP Mailbag, and we will read your stuff on the air. And we are very pleased that we have some listener mail. We have at Frisco Buck on the Twitters has asked us to make our predictions, Chip. Which player from that team up north is most likely to guarantee a win for next weekend? And what's the likelihood of Jim Harbaugh looking for an exit to the NFL if or when they lose again?
Okay, so can I answer the second part of that question first about the Harbaugh before I venture a guess about foolish predictions? We
have no rules on this, Chip. So
do
what you will.
I will say that Jim Harbaugh, no matter what the results, will be in Ann Arbor next year, no matter what. I know that his seat was justifiably getting much toastier than he probably ever anticipated earlier this year, but as we said a moment ago, they are peaking at the right time. So I certainly believe he will be in Ann Arbor next year. I can't imagine, even if an NFL team were to come with the keys to the car, so to speak, and offer him an opportunity to come back to the NFL. The fact that he has unfinished business up in Ann Arbor, I think is going to keep him there for the foreseeable future. Now, the first part of the question, and that the reason why I was trying to jumble some gray matter in my head, trying to think, okay, knowing, like having an idea of this roster. I'm going to probably get this completely wrong. I maybe they learned their lesson from last year from Karan Higdon's foolish statements in the days leading up. But the week is still young, and so are you and I, Michael. So who's to say that somebody doesn't follow their head coach's former brash prediction style from over 30 years ago. So if I had to venture a guess, and this is wobbly at best, I'm going to go with there's a defensive end. He's actually a son of a former Wolverine player. He's Steve Hutchinson's son. I believe his first name is Aiden Hutchinson, defensive end. And the only reason I'm going with that is because I happened to see a tweet. I believe that Aiden Hutchinson said something along the lines of any team is beatable. And that's the only reason I'm going with that. It didn't sound as though he was being disrespectful of Ohio State, but that he's coming into this fairly comfortable and confident. And I have no idea what the media practices are up in Ann Arbor. I know that Ohio State kind of goes into lockdown mode, but maybe if enough people keep asking Aiden Hutchinson, maybe he'll drop the G word against Ohio State.
All right, Chip, I'm going to agree with your second part of the question. I think that Harbaugh's back in Ann Arbor next year, regardless of win-lose this weekend, and I think that it won't even be discussed unless it's a blowout. And I don't expect it to be a blowout, so I'm not thinking that he's going anywhere. And honestly, if Ohio State wins this game, would you want him to go anywhere?
No, I don't want him to go.
No,
Not at all.
No, it's like I miss Rich Rod still.
Rich Rod. Well, that was I will say as a child of the 80s and a younger man of the 90s, who still has a lot of I don't want to say I wake up in a cold sweat, but certainly looks at this game and this week with I'm always kind of on pins and needles, with the anticipation of it. I certainly will. I will confess that when Rich Rod was at the helm, I certainly did not have nearly the level of fear and concern that the Wolverines would spoil Ohio State seasons. That was probably the easiest predictions that I ever made over a 3-year span was when Rich Rod was at the helm for the Wolverines.
Right. So I don't think that Harbaugh's going anywhere. But I do think that if I don't have to have it be a player, I think Harbaugh is the most likely to guarantee the win of anyone in that Michigan locker room. And if it has to be a player, I'll go with his quarterback, Shea Patterson.
I thought of that. I genuinely thought of that. It was only because having seen Aiden Hutchinson make the comment about any team is beatable that led me to that. But I can assure you and our Frisco Buck, who thank you for the question, by the way, keep them coming. That goes for all of you. That I certainly thought that Shea Patterson was a viable candidate to, and again, the week is still young, that viable candidate to, offer up the guarantee.
All right. Again, if you want to ask us a question, just hit us up on Twitter with the hashtag SBPmailbag. And if you get to the point where it's midweek and you go, I don't remember that hashtag, it's the initials of the podcast, Silver Bullets Podcast, SBP, and the word mailbag. That's your hashtag. Hit us up. I'm at Mike36Fan. Please follow me if you're not already doing so, and that way you could just have type it into your little search bar and it'll autofill. Or you could, so at Mike36Fan is me, and also please follow Chip at Chip Minnick, MINNICH, and use that hashtag. We'll answer your question on the air. Chip, it's time for the game. We are as we record this Monday night, and by the way, thank you for recording late so that we could watch the Ohio State basketball team play in its rightful home of St. John Arena that I hold so dear to my heart. A big win over Kent State. We are still several days away. Certainly some stories will unfold throughout this week as this game gets closer and closer. The hype will grow. It's Big Nude Saturday. Pants will be off. And people will be still full of turkey. And how do you see this game unfolding against Michigan with this resurgent offensive line play from the Wolverines and Shea Patterson actually throwing competently down the field?
Well, I do. We've been saying it all along as it comes to the Wolverines. I do agree with you wholeheartedly that they are peaking at the right time. I also agree wholeheartedly with an article that Tom Orr had on the Ozone about a way to determine who is going to win this game, and that is who is able to run the ball. And I realize this is going to sound very risky based on the fact that Shea Patterson is coming off a very dominant performance against Indiana. But I truly believe that the Ohio State defensive strategy is going to be focused on forcing the Wolverines to the air. And that may seem kind of risky considering they have some very, very talented wide receivers. When you look at Donovan Peoples-Jones, Nico Collins, Tariq Black, Ronnie Bell, good tight ends. I mean, this is not a team lacking in offensive talent. But I certainly, when I look at Shea Patterson, I see a guy who is not even completing 60% of his passes. Yes, he's been playing much, much better as of late, but I think Ohio State sells out to shut down the running game, led by Zach Charbonnet, true freshman. I know they have Hassan Haskins, who's a converted linebacker. They are not, by and large, they are not built to live and live and prosper on the passes of Shea Patterson. So that's my early prediction defensively as to what the game plan will be.
Okay. This is going to be an interesting game to me because, like I said, I think that right now their offensive line is playing as well as it's played all year, so I think that they're gelling at the right time. Patterson's coming in confident. They're playing at home, and all of this makes me kind of nervous. I mean, yeah, it's the 90s all over again. That feeling of things are going really well. I hope they don't spoil the season. And as long as this is not a blowout loss, I think Ohio State still gets into the college football playoff with a win in the Big Ten title game. So I don't think it will derail the season unless they just absolutely blast Ohio State, and I don't see that happening. But Ohio State hopefully disaster-proofed themselves this past weekend with all of the turnovers and all of the mistakes, and certainly Ryan Day said he wasn't holding anything back for the Michigan game, but you wouldn't expect him to say that he was either. So, it's kind of hard to judge what's going to happen. I know that Michigan, for me, for what I've seen, and this is just the eye test. I don't know where they ranked. I haven't really quite looked that up and got into that. But for me, I think Ohio State's going to face a more complete defense this week than it did against Penn State. I think the Michigan defense is good against the run. It's good against the pass. Now, last year, Ohio State absolutely torched that defense, and it was a very highly respected defense, a very highly ranked defense, and Ohio State destroyed it. I don't know if that's going to happen this year. I think that it's going to be a much more difficult sled this week, and I obviously I haven't looked far enough into the future to see what the weather is going to be like, but that's another thing that could come into play. So it's going to be a sloppy, nasty, drag-out rock fight of a game, I think. And I don't know. I think if you put these two teams in Indianapolis in a sort of a controlled environment, in a more sterile setting where it's just talent for talent, I think Ohio State could run them off the field, and they could do it in Ann Arbor. I don't expect it, though. I think this is going to be a tough game. As difficult as the Penn State game ended up being in terms of point spread compared to the rest of the season, I think this one will be tighter throughout.
Oh, I certainly agree with you that when I look at this team, they've certainly we keep going over it much better. The early weather forecast right now, looking at it, is for an 80% chance of rain or snow, or as we refer to it as sleet. So, should be interesting to see how that impacts the overall offensive, I guess you could say, offensive game plan that Ohio State unveils against this very talented Wolverine defense.
Yeah. One thing Patterson has done much of this year is throw interceptions. He's fumbled the ball, but he's only thrown, I think, 5 interceptions this season and no more than 1 in any game. And he's only thrown 2 since the game at Iowa, or the home game against Iowa.
Yeah, he's certainly improved, like you said, over the course of the season.
Yeah. Yardage-wise, he seems more comfortable in the offense. He's a difficult guy to sack because he's quick and he's stronger than he looks. So even when you get your hands on him, it's not always easy to bring him down. So he's a guy that can make some plays. I think that Michigan is going to be maybe as amped as they've ever been. I think that they really feel that they have a chance to win this game. I think that they'll come in with a lot of belief and a lot of confidence based on the way that they've played since the second half of the Penn State game, and that may be a very prophetic, turning point for the team when you look back at this season. It certainly has been so far. And, I think they're going to turn this into a rock fight. I really expect a difficult day on Saturday. And I know a lot of people are not concerned about this, but those are probably people that didn't live through the 90s.
Oh, yeah. When you lived through the 90s, you've got the scars to prove it.
Yeah, you really do. So let's put our money where our mouth is, Chip, and let's make our score predictions for the game this Saturday at noon.
Okay. 8-point spread. I'll tell you what, I'm going to go based on the early weather forecast. I like Ohio State, but like you said, I think it's going to be a rock fight. Let's just go. I'm going to go with Ohio State 31. That team up north 21.
31-21 OSU. All right,
Mm-hmm.
Chip. I think I've talked myself into being more nervous about this game than I previously was while I was going over this, and this is. I don't know why, but I've had this feeling all year like Michigan's been, like maybe they got off to a bad start because they've been finally taking this rivalry as seriously as Ohio State has been. And what I mean by that is, when Urban Meyer came in, he made this a focal point, and it's been ever since day one with Urban Meyer that every day they're preparing for their rival, every single day. In some fashion. That's always in their mind. They're always aware of it. It's a point of emphasis. And I think it has been this year for Michigan. And I think that, again, every kid on that team is going to play so far over their heads that their noses bleed for a week to 10 days. And I'm going to actually predict that Michigan gets it done this year. I can't believe I'm saying this. 26-24 Michigan is my prediction. That's not what I want to happen. I certainly see scenarios where Ohio State could win this game. I'm a little bit concerned for two main reasons, really. First-time starters in this game tend to not do well. This will be Justin Fields' first trip to Ann Arbor and his first time playing in the game. I think he's a poised kid. I think he's certainly a talented kid. He's not made a lot of mistakes this year. I could see scenarios where Michigan could force him into mistakes. So that's part of it. The other part of it that didn't bother me until this week. And that's Ryan Day's play calling and the kind of the turtling that Ohio State did in a close knockdown drag-out game against Penn State. And it may just be, like I said, Ryan Day did not say that he was holding anything back from Michigan. He said the opposite. Didn't hold anything back. Wasn't trying to disguise anything. Maybe he's telling the truth. But if he is, that means that he went ultra-conservative in a big game in the way that we saw Urban Meyer do it a few times. And make games closer than I think they needed to be. That has me a little bit nervous about this game. And they're going to want to be the first team that takes down Ryan Day. I'm making this prediction with absolute horror and a desire to be wrong. So, but that's my prediction: 26-24, that team up north, and I hope I'm wrong.
So do I.
I would not have thought when we started recording this that I would have made that pick, but I think I talked myself into it. And maybe that's the John Cooper years talking. But they have a swagger about them because I've watched them the last few weeks. They have a bit of more of a swagger than they've had previously, and I think Ohio State will be the best defense they've played all year. But Ohio State's been a little bit. They haven't been turnover prone this year, but they haven't really been tested. And the first time that they were really tested, they did give the ball away. They're going to need to play the perfect game, and maybe they will play the perfect game coming off a decidedly imperfect game.
No, I think you raised a lot of valid points.
All right, Chip. So I got to get the bad taste of this out of my mouth. Let's talk about the Buckeyes again, and give me your pick to click. You're going to start on offense this week.
I'm going to start on offense.
Yes.
Okay, I realize how this is going to be so cliche, but I'm going to go with Justin Fields.
Okay. He's going to need to have a big game for Ohio State to win this game. He's going to need to make good decisions. He's going to need to take care of the ball, and he's going to have to take his shots. He's going to have to be accurate when he takes his shots, and he has not been accurate down the field this past week. And if you're saying there's going to be sleet, that's not going to be any better weather conditions. So I hope you are correct in that he does indeed click. I have been taking receivers and regretting it a lot this year. But at the same time, I think Michigan's defense is really good. I have a lot of respect for them. But I'm going to take him anyway. I'm going to take J.K. Dobbins.
Like it.
All right, so there we go. That takes us to the defensive side of the ball. And, I have the first pick, and I can take Chase Young. But I'm going to not do that. I think they're going to devote a lot of resources to taking care of Chase Young, to reading him and leaving him unblocked, and playing off of that, like I think Penn State did well with when Will Levis was in the game. So I'm going to say that we need a big game from someone else, and I'm going to say that someone else is going to be Baron Browning this week.
Like it as well.
All right, what do you got for me on the defensive side of the ball?
All right, so we were giving praise and recognition to Pete Werner earlier. I'm going to say that when the Wolverines try to isolate any one of their talented tight ends, that's going to be Mr. Werner's responsibility to take care of it, and I think he's going to rise to the occasion.
All right, so I gave you the layup, and you turned it down.
I know.
You unselfishly passed the ball.
I know.
All right, so there you have it. Those are our picks to click on our predictions, and we'll get those in. I can't wait to take all the abuse when we do our staff predictions piece later this week. I will be the hater. You guys can call me a hater, but I'm not hating. I actually just am very concerned.
I didn't see you're a hater. I see where you're coming from too.
Yeah. No, I know that there will be people that call me a hater or whatever, or say, oh, you don't have the belief or whatever. I could see I could see scenarios where Ohio State would win this game by 5 touchdowns. I don't think they will, but I think they're good enough to win this game by 5 touchdowns. But the game's being played on the field in less than perfect conditions on the road, with a quarterback playing in in the game for the first time. And historically, that has not gone well. Yes, some first-time starters have won in this series. First-year starters have won in this series before. It's happened. It's not the norm. It's those are the outliers. So, those are my concerns. I very much have the concern. It's when I make my predictions, and I've been wrong a lot in my predictions, but they're kind of a combination of what I think the trends are, what I think the matchup looks like, and just sheer gut feeling. And, this team has not been through a lot of adversity this year, and the adversity that it's gone through just in this past week, I didn't think they responded particularly well to it, but I think some of that was just going into a shell. I think some of it was the coaching staff not, let the dogs run free, man. That's what I say. You got the better athletes. Let them go be athletes. I mean, that's how you turn around the defense, right? I mean, you turn around the defense by saying we're going to make it simple and we're going to let you go eat. And I think that the same could be true of the entire team. And I think that the Penn State game was unnecessarily close because I think that the coaching staff didn't just turn them loose. I think that I see no way that Indiana and Minnesota can throw for hundreds and hundreds of yards against that defense, but Justin Fields is kept under 200 only because his own coach doesn't call enough pass plays.
Yeah, like I said, I have faith that Coach Day was kind of holding back. That's just my opinion.
Okay. Well, I hope you're right. I know that he's learned a lot from Urban Meyer, and I know that we've seen in the last few years Urban Meyer was in charge. We've seen some very close games in the big games that didn't necessarily need to be close, and we've seen some less, just all out going for it in those games. We've seen a little bit more close to the vest play in those games in the last few years. I don't know if that's something that Ryan Day has said, well, this is the recipe to success. It worked for Urban. This is what I'm going to do because you'd be stupid to change anything. And, that may be what he did, and it may not be what he did. It may be that he's got us all schnookered, and he's going to put 60 points on Michigan like they did last year.
We'll see.
Yeah. All right. So that's it. We will be back next week, Chip, to discuss the game and to prepare for the Big Ten Championship game because, ultimately Michigan's ability to ruin Ohio State's season is very, very limited this year. I mean, even if they win, if they don't win big, and Ohio State turns it around and goes and wins in Indianapolis against either Minnesota or Wisconsin, both ranked teams, I think they've done enough to get into the college football playoff. Of course, I say that, and, the College Football Playoff Committee changes the rules every year, so you never know. But, it's certainly likely, I think, that Ohio State could still get in. On the other hand, they could just put Alabama in.
Wouldn't be surprising at all.
It would not be the first time that's happened. So, anyway, is there anything else we need to discuss before we get out of here? It's been a long show.
No, wish you and your family and all of our listeners a very safe and happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I feel bad now. Now that I've predicted Ohio State loss, I actually feel physically ill. Good luck to you, Chip, as well with your Thanksgiving holiday, and hopefully you will all have a very, happy and safe Thanksgiving, and everybody will eat just the right amount so that you don't feel bad, but that you get your fill.
Mm-hmm. That's always the goal.
And the same thing to all of our listeners. Enjoy the pumpkin pie and the apple cider and the stuffing and the turkey and all the other things that you eat, or even if you're one of those folks that just orders in Chinese food, whatever you're doing on Thanksgiving, do it well and enjoy it. And we'll be back to talk about the game next week. We'll preview the following week's game, which will either be Minnesota or Wisconsin, Chip. That's a game to keep our eye on this week.
Yeah, and I think a 3:30 one for what it's worth.
So, after you're done berating me on Twitter for being wrong, you can flip that game on and see who the opponent will be.
I'm not going to berate anybody.
All right. Well, I'm talking to our listeners. They'll be happy to berate me for not having the faith or whatever it is they say. But yeah, it should be fun. Should be fun to see. I just, this is the time of year I always get nervous, and I'm like Pavlov's dog. I'm just conditioned that way.
The 90s will do that to you.
I think they call it post-traumatic stress disorder, I think is what it's called.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
All right, Chip, that will do it for this week's edition of the Silver Bullets podcast. We'll come back doing it again next week. Thanks for everybody for listening. Make sure you get your questions in to us on Twitter, hashtag SBP Mailbag. I'm at Mike36Fan. He's at Chip Minnick, MINNICH. Where else can they find you, Chip?
They can find me on the Hayes and Cannon section of the ozone.net, as well as I'm a contributor to Athlon Sports.
I am not on Athlon Sports, but I am on the Hayes and Cannon section of the ozone.net. I am the grumpy old Buckeye. I tell you what things made me angry every week on that particular site, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of things to be aggravated about this week, as they always are. If I can find things to be grumpy about after the Maryland game, I can find things to be grumpy about after any game. So read our stuff there, and also if you enjoy music or other things, you want to read about that, you can catch me at michaellikestowrite.com. So it's a long name to type into your thing, but if you bookmark it, you won't have to type it in anymore.
Good point. Very good.
All right, that'll do it, Chip. I'll see you next week, and go Bucks.
Go Bucks.